Power of Controlling Your Mind. A life-changing parable for adults. Zen Motivational video hook. Have you ever considered that a single thought, just one fleeting idea, can change the entire course of your life? It's true. Every action we take and every word we speak begins with a thought. And sometimes, a single wrong thought can push us onto a path we never intended. Let me tell you a story about a tailor named Elias Hart. The winter sea was quiet the morning Elias flipped the sign on his tiny tailor shop to open. He was past 60, a widower with skilled hands and a gentle voice, known across the coastal packed town for stitching a tear so cleanly that even the wind forgot where it had been. Business had slowed. Heating oil cost more than he wished to admit, and the landlord's polite note, "Rent due by Friday," sat under a paperweight like a small square worry. Elias brewed tea and began the day with the habit that had carried him through lean years, one honest stitch after another. "Guard your heart," he murmured, recalling a verse from childhood, "for everything you do flows from it." He didn't say it like a preacher. He said it the way old fishermen talk about the tide, a fact proven by time. Near noon, the bell above the door chimed and a woman entered, her wool coat buttoned to the throat, her eyes bearing the fatigue of fresh grief. "Sir," she said, placing a folded coat on the counter, "this was my father's. He passed last week. Could you mend the lining? I'd like to wear it at his memorial." "Tomorrow," Elias said. "No charge." She insisted on paying, slid an envelope across the wood, and left quickly, one hand at her scarf, the other wiping away a tear before she reached the street. Later, as the kettle hummed and the clock ticked in the quiet shop, Elias noticed the envelope again, heavier than a deposit should be. Inside were crisp bills, far more than the repair would cost, and a small folded note with an address. He felt a faint tug in his chest, as if a thread had caught on something unseen. A thought arrived, ordinary as a passerby peeking through the window. What if she never returns? Another followed more boldly. "The rent is due. You have been honest your whole life." Perhaps this is a little help sent by Providence. Such thoughts are not shouted. They are whispered. In the silence, they sounded reasonable. He set the envelope beneath his ledger. "Just until morning," he told himself. No harm. But a line from a Buddhist teaching surfaced. "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts." He felt its truth like a draft under the door. One thought invited another, then another. Pay the rent, fix the roof leak, buy a new machine, take the train inland to visit your sister, until comfort spread through the shop like early sun. He stitched the torn lining with practiced grace. At dusk, as always, he walked to the cemetery to leave a single white lily on his wife's grave. "Mara," he whispered, "I'm tired." The sea answered with slow breathing, and something in him steadied. Morning brought hard frost on the window. The woman returned, anxious now, clutching the mended coat to her chest. "It fits like a memory," she said, half smiling through brimming eyes. "My father would have liked you." She reached for a small purse, then froze. "The envelope," she whispered. "I must have left it here. It was the last of his money, for medical bills. I don't know what I'll do." Elias felt in his bones how some decisions divide a life into a before and an after. He could say nothing. He could wait to see if she offered a reward, to test whether fate meant him to keep what lay below the ledger. He could explain how hard the winter had been, how he had only meant to, well, borrow it for a day. The mind is a clever advocate when the heart is weary. But habit is stronger than argument. For years, Elias had practiced small honesty, rounding a bill down rather than up, returning buttons found on the floor, speaking kindly of those not present to defend themselves. Those little stitches had become a seam through his character. And now, under pressure, the seam held. He opened the drawer, brought out the envelope, and set it between them. "You left this," he said, his own steady voice surprising him. She opened it with trembling hands, counted quickly, and exhaled a gratitude that made her look suddenly younger. "It's all here," she said, blinking back tears. "My father used to say a town can be mended like a coat, but the needle is character." She reached into the envelope and withdrew the small note. He wrote this before he died. "If you meet someone who does the right thing when no one is watching, give him this address." Elias unfolded the note. It was a letter from a local foundation founded by Mr. Benedict, a quiet benefactor who had funded scholarships and soup kitchens for years. The letter invited a craftsman of integrity to run a rent-free community workshop with a modest stipend, training young men and women who needed a second chance. Heat rose in Elias's chest. The room blurred, then cleared, and he laughed, one brief incredulous sound that turned into a soft, shaking sob. The woman understood, grief having taught her the tremor of gift and relief. By spring, the workshop opened on a sunlit corner near the harbor. Mornings smelled of coffee and wood polish. The sewing machines hummed like bees. Teenagers who had drifted through alleys came in shyly, learned to measure and cut. A widower who had fallen quiet since his wife's death found himself teaching a boy how to set a sleeve, and in explaining the craft rediscovered a sentence he hadn't spoken in years. "This is good work." Elias taught as he lived, carefully, honestly, and warmly. He never lectured about the envelope or the test. He hung a small frame on the wall with a single line: "Guard your thoughts, for they shape your life." When students asked, he would smile and say, "A coat begins with cloth, and a life begins with a thought. Choose your fabric." He showed them how to pause before cutting, how to measure twice and sew once, and how to breathe before deciding, one full breath between impulse and action. He told them fear and greed love speed. Wisdom prefers a slower gait. If a thought comes that makes you smaller, darker, meaner, he said, let it pass like a storm cloud. If a thought comes that makes you truer, gentler, stronger, water it. On Sundays, he sat in the third pew of the church where he had been baptized as a boy, letting the Psalms rinse the week from his mind. On other days, he stopped by the small Buddhist center where an old friend lit incense for her late husband, and they would sit quietly for 10 minutes. None of it felt contradictory. It was all practice, cleaning the windows of the mind so the day's light could enter. The town changed in ways not flashy but solid. Coats lasted longer. Fewer arguments spilled from the tavern at midnight. A young mother who had avoided the shop because she couldn't afford repairs learned to mend her children's clothes at the community table, finding in that mending both dignity and a friend. The landlord's drifting nephew became Elias's apprentice and began arriving early to sweep, proud to keep the place neat. Sometimes, standing at the work table with afternoon sun pooling on the floor, Elias felt the ghost of that winter thought, the one that had whispered its reasonable case for keeping what was not his. He smiled at it the way one smiles at a stray cat that no longer comes inside. A thought is only a guest unless you give it a key. He did not believe his honesty had bought him a blessing. He believed it had kept him open to receive one. When people thanked him for the workshop, he shook his head and said, "I just kept to the seam." If they pressed, he answered with a proverb he had stitched into his days, Better is a little with righteousness than great revenue without right. It sounded old-fashioned, but it wore well. Years later, when Elias's hands began to shake, and he taught more by watching than by doing, a new sign appeared above the door: Heart and Apprentices. The town had indeed been mended in small ways, edge by edge, hem by hem. People liked to say the shop had saved many lives. Elias gently corrected them. No, the shop gave us a place to practice saving our thoughts. Destiny does not arrive with trumpets. It comes quietly, in a moment when no one is watching, and asks a question only you can hear. Which thought will you water? Once, in a winter shop, a tailor chose the thought that kept him whole. From that choice flowed apprentices, repaired sleeves, warm mornings, and a town that learned to measure twice. First the cloth, then the heart. If this story touches your heart, please give it a like and consider subscribing to Zen Motivational Video. May your thoughts be gentle, your choices steady, and your days stitched together with peace.